Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. In addition to their wheat pasture, a lot of Oklahoma cattle producers are tapping into their hay supplies this time of year. And to help make your hay go a little bit further, you may want to think about limit feeding. So today we're revisiting a SUNUP piece on the topic that takes us to Garvin County. Lewis Morton makes this drive every morning.
Right here is kind of the point to where we can separate cattle.
To the edge of a pasture where his cows are eagerly waiting.
We kind of have three different places. We have about 80 acres of Bermuda, about 60 acres of alfalfa, oat mixture. We have some volunteer wheat and rye, and then another 40 of rye. And then back over here we just have some native grass. So what we've done on our operation is to kind of be able to use the forages for each of the type of different season to kind of cut our cost a little bit as far as feeding cattle.
Like a lot of producers, you started feeding hay a lot earlier this past fall because of the drought and the conditions.
Yeah, we ended up having to start caking and feeding hay starting probably about September. As you guys know, is real dry, and we didn't get any hay cut on our Bermuda this year. We basically stuck our cattle out there on that, and as we were going through it, we realized we only had about 160 bales that we got out of our alfalfa and wheat this year to feed for our cattle. And so when we started feeding in September, we were going through about a bale a day, and that wasn't going to last very long. And so my dad and I looked up some stuff and visited with some folks up at OSU and some of the stuff that you guys did on your show, and limit feeding was one that we said, well, we have a place to do it. Let's see if how it works. So what we ended up doing is we have this pen here, and we stuck 2 round bells in here and closed them off. And basically what I did is I went in at about 6 or 7 in the morning. I'd open the gates. Of course, the cows, they were ready to eat. They would come in, and when they would eat, and I'd probably leave them in here till about noon. Did that for the first week, and what we found out is that instead of feeding a bale every day, we're basically feeding 2 bales every 3 days or so. And so we were basically saving about a bale. And so with prices and everything, as high as they were, that's just a good cost saving. Plus the cows stayed in pretty good condition as well. So
it really works. So someone who may be a little apprehensive, you're sort of proof positive that it is working and your herd is looking okay.
Right. I believe there's a really big balance in what we do for research and then what the normal cattleman has done for the last 40 or 50 years. And I think you have to have a really good balance and be able to try some things and see if they work for your operation. It probably doesn't work for everybody, but for us, it worked really good this year.
And you have this area set up relatively close to your house. It's a place that's manageable getting the cattle in and out. That's probably key too.
Right. It is very, from a management standpoint for us. I just probably live about 2 touchdowns from this area that we have right here. So basically it's getting up in the morning and coming and letting them in, and then at lunchtime basically I'll open this up out and let the cows on out, and then they'll just kind of wander for the rest of the afternoon.
Lewis oversees the operation with his dad, Robert Morton.
And over the years, it always amazed me at the amount of wastage that we would see with round bell feeders, but it didn't seem like the design ever changed much over the years. And we were watching the program y'all had on limited feeding, and it struck us as an idea we wanted to try because of the fact that our cattle would gather around the round bell feeders. They would lay in it. It just seemed like a tremendous amount that was not utilized.
Dave Lallman is the OSU Extension beef cattle specialist. He suggested limit feeding to producers last fall on SUNUP as a way to cope with drought. And Dave, it's really nice to see the Mortons utilizing that research that you and your colleagues have done and applying it to benefit their operation.
It is. We've gotten a lot of phone calls and interest in that project that we did, or the SUNUP program that we did several months ago, and it is good to see people using that information.
And for people who are sort of unfamiliar with limit feeding hay, let's give them a bit of an overview of how it works.
Sure. Well, the concept is if you can limit access to hay, you can both reduce waste and increase digestibility of the hay. And so the research shows that you can cut back by 20 to 25% of hay intake, and at the same time the cows still do pretty well.
And it doesn't seem like it would work, but the research shows that the cows are getting what they need.
Yeah, you know, you would think if you just let cows have access for 6 hours instead of 24 hours a day that they might gradually get thinner, but the studies actually demonstrate that they're still consuming the majority of what they need, and by not allowing them to have free choice access 24 hours a day, the hay digestibility goes up substantially. And so, yep, you do wind up with a considerable amount of hay savings, and it's resulted in the Mortons and other people not having to purchase as much hay.
I think you know, the big key on it is you know, how you manage at the time and coming up with a plan on what you're going to do, because you know, every year is going to be different. You know, next year it may be wet. You know, this year it was dry, and so we had to come up with a different, you know, plan on how we're going to save on our cost. You know, I mean, do we go out and spend the money on hay this year, or you know, is there a way that we can manage the forage and the land that we have better to better utilize and cut our costs?
Last year was a record year for cattle prices in Oklahoma, and it seems like it's been a year since we've talked to you, Derrell. What has happened since then?
Well, we started off pretty strong so far in 2015. You know, we're still trying to get a feel for the market and waiting for new data. One of the things that has happened is we've gotten new trade data recently, and we're still finishing up last year. There's a couple month delay in that. So, you know, beef exports were down in November, the latest month. Beef imports were up. Both of those are kind of what you'd expect given, you know, decreased beef production in the U.S., high prices, and the fact that the dollar has strengthened recently makes our exports more expensive and imports somewhat cheaper in the U.S.
Well, speaking of trade data and some of our neighbors, let's talk about our relationship with Canada.
You know, Canada is one of our major beef export markets. It's also one of our major beef import sources. And so, you know, and sometimes people don't understand why we would do both of those things. But, you know, there's several issues at work here with Canada. First of all, beef is lots of different products. And so we don't all like the same things. And so trade helps basically match the product mix in both countries to the relative preferences for consumers there. The other part of it with Canada in particular is the fact that we have a very long border with them, and it's very expensive to ship product east and west in both countries. It makes more sense, given that the cattle are in Western Canada, to send meat south, and the people in Canada and the eastern side are closer to our Midwest supplies. So that's another reason why we trade. So we're getting more imports from Canada, less exports, and we're getting more feeder cattle or cattle imports, particularly with an increase in feeder cattle in 2014.
And another country we do a lot of trade with is Mexico.
Mexico, likewise, is one of our major beef export and import markets. And again, that's a relatively recent development, at least part of that. Mexico has been a source of feeder cattle to the U.S. for many, many years. And for 20-something years, it's been a fairly important export market for the U.S. But in the last 5 years, Mexico has become the fourth largest source of beef imports into the U.S. And so things have changed in Mexico. Again, it's a bit more like Canada now, in that we have more trade of products, trying to sort out who likes what the most and how we can improve that. And of course, that adds value to the markets in both countries when we do that.
Okay, there are a lot of Oklahoma producers that are thinking about expanding their herds and all that this year, buying cattle, selling cattle. What should 2015 look like?
It looks like we're on track to continue expansion of the herd. I say that. We haven't got the data to confirm for sure that 2014 was expansion, but I'm quite confident that it will show some herd expansion. It really hinges in the Southern Plains still on moisture conditions. We had a pretty good year in 2014, but we're clearly not out of all the drought, and we're still vulnerable, and so that'll be a major factor as we go into the spring.
When do you think we'll meet the levels of cattle that we had back before the big sell-off of 2011?
At this point, I think it'll take much of the rest of the decade, frankly,
Really?
to get back to the last time. It might not take that long to get back to the pre-drought levels, but prior to that, we had liquidation, and to get back to the last time we tried to rebuild the herd from the last low prior to this, it'll take the rest of the decade.
Okay, thank you much. Derrell Pill, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. We've had a lot of cloudy, foggy days this winter across Oklahoma. A look at December's percent sunshine shows how we range from a low of 20% sunshine at Okmulgee to a high of 77% sunshine at Kenton. While that can be discouraging for folks around town, it's actually been encouraging for folks on Oklahoma's farms and ranches. A map of the change in 10-inch soil moisture over the last week shows why cloudy, foggy weather can be a benefit. We hold our soil moisture. Only 4 locations recorded a drop in soil moisture: Altus, Minco, Oklahoma City South, and Weber Falls. And the drops were very low, only 1/10 on a scale from 0 to 1. The current 10-inch soil moisture levels as of Wednesday showed how the eastern and central parts of the state have high levels of soil moisture. Wheat and canola country in the western parts of the state are on the dry side. Soil moisture patterns really track back to November. We see a similar pattern of moisture on a 60-day rainfall map from November 15th to January 14th. Here's Gary with a closer look at our winter precipitation.
Thanks, Al, and good morning, everybody. Well, we're about halfway through winter. Now, winter for climatologists and meteorologists runs from December 1st through February 28th. So January, middle of January, that's about halfway through winter. Let's take a look back at the precipitation and see how we've done so far, at least at the halfway point. Now, these are the Mesonet rainfall total maps for the December 1st through January 14th period. Not really a shock, but for the most part, much of the northwestern half of the state has been dry, obviously. Many Mesonet stations have recorded less than an inch, and parts of the Panhandle, however, have had some pretty good snows, and you melt that down and that's about an inch of liquid water or so. So pretty good in the Panhandle, at least, from Hooker out to Boise City. Now, as usual, southeastern Oklahoma leads the way with 4 to 7 inches of rain, and Broken Bow has the most in the state with 7.6 inches of precipitation. At the low point is Eric out in southwestern Oklahoma with only about 1/3 of an inch. How's that stack up to normal for that December 1st through January 14th period? Well, the Panhandle and southeastern Oklahoma are obviously above normal for the winter thus far, but the rest of the state lies from less than 20% of normal to around 60% of normal, and it varies from the southwest and out in the northwest. But in general, most of the state has been dry so far halfway through winter. Let's take a little bit longer look. Let's look at next week, the long-range outlooks from the Climate Prediction Center. And remember, these are probabilities, not amounts. They do show increased odds of above normal precipitation for the January 19th through 23rd period, and also increased odds of above normal temperatures. I think we'll take both of those, but keep in mind that above normal precipitation during the lowest or the driest part of the year, which we're in right now, does not necessarily mean gully washers, okay? So not necessarily drought busters coming up next week. So we have some possibly wet and warm weather coming up. Now remember, if that warm weather continues and we don't get a lot of precipitation, we're going to have to start looking at that drought again across the state that's still in place, especially across the western half of the state. See if it starts to advance once again. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Joining us now is Jody Campeacci, our Ag Policy Specialist. And Jody, with the new year here, it's time for producers to think about moving ahead with some of those farm bill decisions.
Yeah, you know, last year we had a lot of meetings and producers were able to get a lot of information. Now, starting with the new year, they really need to start applying some of that information and start seriously thinking about their commodity program decisions.
There's a lot of things to sort through, but hopefully it's kind of starting to gel. And as it does, there's some deadlines to think about?
Yes, the first deadline's coming up February 27th, and that's going to be the decision to update payment yields and reallocate base acreage. We also have crop insurance deadlines coming up this spring as well, the middle of March. So we'll have some new crop insurance programs, of course, the SCO supplemental coverage option, and then the stacked income protection plan for cotton producers. That'll be coming up. Producers will need to start thinking about whether they want to add those new products to their existing crop insurance policies. After that, we'll have March 31st, and that will be the ARC ag risk coverage and PLC price loss coverage election.
So still a lot to consider, a lot to sort through, and you and the extension team are gearing up for another series of educational meetings and workshops?
Yeah, what's going to happen now that we're into the new year, is that we're going to start having these workshops where we're going to set up computer labs. So producers can come in and bring in their farm information, and OSU Extension can just help them input their numbers into the decision aids and try to make some decisions for their farms.
Now, in terms of someone who's interested in getting to a meeting in kind of their region of the state, what do they need to do?
So they can go to the OSU Farm Bill website and see the list of meetings. They can also contact their local extension agent. And if for some reason, they look around and they just don't see any in their area, please be sure to, contact their extension agent and request a meeting, and we can try to accommodate that.
Okay. Lots of information, lots of people to see, but no doubt you and the team will be sorting through it all.
Yes, we will.
Okay, Jody Campeacci, our Ag Policy Specialist. And for a link to the Farm Bill informational meetings, just go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
We've talked before on the CowCalf Corner about the length of time that we think the stage 2 of calving takes place. And stage 2 means when we first see the appearance of a water bag or baby calf's feet until that calf is completely delivered on the ground. And in the case of that first calf, 2-year-old heifer, on the average, it's going to be about 1 hour. For the adult cow, a cow that's had calves before, it'll be about half that, or around 30 minutes. What happens if we allow stage 2 to go much longer than that? Well, there's research that's been done at the USDA research station up at Miles City, Montana, back in the 80s. And what they looked at was the effect of allowing a heifer to go much past that 1 hour in stage 2, even though she eventually would calve unassisted, as compared to heifers that got some assistance at about that 1 hour mark. They kept track then of those cattle through the next breeding season. And what they found were the heifers that had that prolonged stage 2 of calving, 17% fewer of them were cycling at the start of the next breeding season. And that translated into 20% fewer actually being bred in the upcoming breeding season. So the take-home message from this research is very clear to me. That as we go through this calving season, whether it's a cow or that first calf heifer, let's keep track of how long it is that she's in the throes of labor. And if she's going past that hour, in the case of that first calf heifer, half hour in the situation with the older cow, then we probably better get her up and provide assistance so that she isn't in that situation where she has that prolonged labor that's going to cause her to be slower to return to estrus cycles and therefore less likely to rebreed next year. We want to get every cow bred as possible this spring so that we have as high a calf crop available for us in the future, as these strong calf prices mean that we certainly want to be able to sell every calf that possibly we can from our operation. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's CowCalf Corner.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, joins us now. And Kim, prices have been down. It sounds like there's a lot of different factors behind that.
Well, you've got the funds, you've got petroleum prices, you've got the economies in Europe and in Egypt, Eastern Asia that are deteriorating. You've got USDA released the WASDA report. They released the winter wheat seedings intentions and the stocks reports. So you've got quite a bit going on in the market. Probably the most talked about is the funds. They've been, for the most part, getting out of commodities, selling corn, beans, wheat, live cattle, feeder cattle, and you've got the oil prices, which I don't think indirectly have had much impact on the commodity prices except psychologically as those prices gone down. I think the value of the dollar's had some impact there. I think it's peaked out around 92, 93 on that index, and I think your oil prices have bottomed out around 49 or 50, and so I think we're looking at those other factors from here on out.
There's a lot to sort out. You mentioned oil prices, you mentioned the value of the dollar. How about that supply and demand report and also those planted acres? How's that playing in?
Well, I think the planted acres were important numbers there for the winter wheat. They were down 5% from last year for all wheat. Hard red winter wheat acreage was down 3% at 29.5 million acres. Oklahoma was down 4%. Kansas and Texas were both down 2%. I think those are some significant numbers and should support our prices. If you look at the WASDA report, we just talk about ending stocks. All wheat, they raised the ending stocks from 654 million bushels to 687. The good news, hard red winter wheat stocks were lowered from 253 million bushels to 227. The world wasn't changed. So I think that's, for the long term, positive for wheat prices. Corn, they lowered the corn ending stocks to 1.88 billion bushels, down from 2. I think that's positive for corn, but we still got excess corn. Soybeans, no change, and so those are kind of neutral, and we'll just have to see what happens in the long run there.
So Kim, at least there's a little bit of positive news, but prices are still down.
Yeah, if you look at wheat prices since mid-December, they've fallen $1.09. Corn prices are down about 30 cents over the last couple of weeks. Soybean prices down 40 cents. You've had the funds moving out of all the commodities. Live cattle are down $15 and feeder cattle down 25. And it's just the funds right now, I think, are driving the market, or have been over the last couple of weeks.
You mentioned the funds. What else is kind of driving the market moving forward, looking at the next few weeks?
Well, I think it's funds and exports. If we can get some export demand with the economies, they're not buying U.S. wheat. It's overpriced for the world market. And I think with the lower economic conditions in the importing markets, they're buying French wheat. You know, we've talked about that months ago, that France has plenty of wheat to export, but it's very poor quality. And I think what they're doing is they're able to buy that lower priced French wheat, even though the quality's not there. That's what they can afford to buy right now. And I think that's impacting our prices.
And finally today, what are your thoughts on harvest delivery prices?
Well, if you look at what's being offered right now on forward contract for wheat, it's about $5.60. That's using a negative 25 basis off that July contract. Corn's using a negative 35 basis for most of Oklahoma. That's $3.75. If you're going to the Panhandle, you can use a positive 15-cent basis there. Soybeans around $9 using a 90-cent under basis, and canola around $6.50 a bushel there.
Okay, Kim Anderson, great report this week. We'll see you next week.
Timber harvest and forest regeneration are important considerations for managing white-tailed deer in the eastern part of the state. There's two basic ways to approach it. We can do an even-aged harvest, or an even-aged management, or an uneven-aged. Both of these can work for whitetail depending on how they're applied. Now, an even age is basically a forest stand where all of the stems, all the biomass is the same age. It regenerated at the same time. The best way to think of this is a clear cut. When we come into an area and cut everything on a site, you'll get some seed germination, but a lot of those trees are simply resprouting from the roots, particularly with a lot of our oaks. And so what you'll end up with is all of the stems are virtually the same age. And we also see this a lot in commercial pine production, where we have loblolly pine and they're all planted at the same time and all harvested at the same time. Now, for a few years after a clear cut, this produces a lot of really valuable browse. And this is woody plants that are low, within the reach of deer. Some of these are really important deer forages. We also get a lot of soft mass production, all right, things like persimmon. But over time, these clear cuts grow out of the reach of deer and the productivity is a little limited, and before those oaks start to produce hard mast again, there might be a period where it's not quite as productive for whitetail. So if you're going to do even age stand management, the important consideration is to not treat vast areas at once, or not harvest vast areas at once, but try to do blocks, maybe 20 acres, 100 acres, or 200 acres, somewhere in that range. Deer have large home ranges, so the blocks can be fairly large, but if you clear cut 5,000 acres at once, there's going to be a period after maybe about 15 or 18 years where the forage potential is limited on that site. Now, the other type of management is uneven age stand management, and this is basically trees of various ages, and you're essentially, to create that, you've went in and you selectively cut certain trees or groups of trees, and so you might have gaps in the forest where you're getting regeneration, but you'll have an overstory of older trees. This is kind of a good hedge because you have some browse production, some soft mass production, and herbaceous production, but you also have retained hard mass producing trees like oaks. The thing you need to be careful about if you do a selective cut like this is to make sure you don't high grade your timber. Not only will this be detrimental to wildlife, but it'll be detrimental to the timber value if you're trying to market this timber down the road. So you need to hire a professional consulting forester to make sure you're taking out the trees that need to be taken out. Just taking out all the large trees is not necessarily going to yield a good forest down the road, because a lot of these smaller diameter trees could be the same age. They're just stunted. So don't assume that age is always related to size of tree. And a forester can help you make those determinations so that your land is productive for wildlife and also productive for timber production.
That'll do it for us this week. A reminder, you can find us anytime online at sunup.okstate.edu, and also follow us on YouTube and other social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week. We'll see you next time at SUNUP.